Us on the line is Professor Ruth Hall. She's with the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Reform. Professor, thank you very much for being with us. Your thoughts on the issues raised in Parliament today, if you had a chance to listen to that debate.
Thank you so much. Yes. Just to clarify, I'm actually at the University of the Western Cape. But I think that today was really a historic day. It was a day in which the ANC has decided to move away from the constitutional agreement that was made in the negotiations in 95 and then into 96. And I think that we should be clear about exactly what was agreed upon today. The Constitution has not been changed, but the EFF and the ANC, together with some other minor parties, have mandated the Constitutional Review Committee to look into how Section 25, which deals with property rights, could be amended to provide for expropriation without compensation. And they've been given up to the end of August. What we can expect is that there will be public debates and hearings and internal discussions within Parliament over the next 6 months or so. But I think that importantly, we need to be aware that the discussion will center on under what circumstances could expropriation without compensation take place. And this is where I think we're going to see divisions re-emerging, because it's quite clear that while today looked like there was a moment of agreement across political parties, in fact, the EFF's position is that there should be expropriation without compensation across the board, whereas Ramaphosa and the ANC have made it clear that they see this as only one option. In other words, under certain, probably exceptional circumstances, they would be willing to expropriate without compensation. I think that we need to be clear that the ANC has, since 1996, had the power to expropriate for land reform purposes, paying just and equitable compensation, not necessarily at market price, and has chosen not to use those powers. So now what we're seeing is that the ANC is now blaming the Constitution for the fact that it hasn't used that option up to now. So I think that we're seeing a bit of a false political consensus right now, and it's likely to become deeply divided and acrimonious in the coming 6 months.
Does what you're saying lend credence to what the DA was saying, that government wants to wash its hands for past inaction because there were tools at its disposal, and we don't even know right now how much land government owns? A lot of people questioning the validity of the recent audits.
Yes, I think the recent audit is troublesome. I think the most definitive statement around this issue comes from the recent high-level panel that was appointed by Parliament and chaired by former President Malema Motlanthe. And what it found, after exhaustive research across the country, national hearings in every province, is that it said, actually, the state has chosen not to use its constitutional powers. And the problems with the slow pace of land reform, only 8% of commercial farms have been redistributed since the 1990s. The budget has halved since the Mbeki years. So the problems are a lack of policy direction, an unwillingness to use the Constitution to drive through land reform, a failure to budget, institutional difficulties. So there are a range of problems. And I think that one of the issues that Parliament will still have to grapple with, quite separately from this question of expropriation and whether or not to pay compensation in particular cases, is the question of who should get the land. And on that, the high-level panel actually has given a massive challenge to government to say that what we see is widespread elite capture of land reform. So the question is not only how you get the land, but who should be getting it and how they can be helped to use it. Yeah. But on the issue of expropriation, I think that there are certainly going to be certain situations where political parties will say, for instance, where there's clear benefit from apartheid, where the state has subsidized the improvement of farms, where they're not being used well, etc. There could be reasons to not compensate or to compensate at far below market price. The truth is we haven't even tried this out. And in the 22 years since the Constitution was adopted, the Constitutional Court has never had a case where government has said, here's a case where we don't want to pay market price. Tell us what would be just and equitable. We've never used that room for maneuver. So we're in quite a strange situation where the ANC has been extremely cautious and pandered to the interests of investors and landowners, and is now turning around and embracing the discourse of the EFF, obviously in a situation where the ANC is feeling on the back foot in terms of political support.
I'm glad you brought this up, because there are rumors of people who don't want to sell, pushing up prices, really putting government in a tough spot. But it's interesting that you raised that they could have gone to the courts. The Constitution allows for equitable payment, not necessarily market related. You're talking about targets being clearer and who will lose the land, who will gain the land. What about the whole issue of the dates, how far we go back? That was raised by the former President Jacob Zuma. Just explain for us right now who are seen as beneficiaries, how far we're looking back.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. Who are the beneficiaries? Who's benefited? Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking how far do we go back in terms of land dispossession, so restoring their land?
Yeah. So even though the land claims process was reopened in 2014, the agreement that land claims will only be entertained if they relate to dispossession after 1913, the date of the Natives Land Act, that still stands. And I think that many South Africans deeply disagree with that and feel that it's wrong, that in fact large proportions of our population, large areas of the country were conquered and people were dispossessed before that. So clearly land restitution and land claims are not an adequate avenue for dealing with what's obviously a big historical grievance. I think that what we've seen over the past 20 years is a failure to use the land redistribution process, where people don't have to show that they had a particular relationship with a particular piece of land. Simply there is a social justice imperative, which is that there must be equitable access to land. Section 25(5), which is part of the property clause, says there must be equitable access to land. And that's another area where Motlante's high-level panel said, actually, it's probable that our land redistribution program is not matching up to that requirement of equitable access. It's not enough to say we're going to give a few farms to a few business people and ignore the range of other more desperate needs in society. So equitable access requires that we actually prioritize the needs of those who are in greatest need. And I think that is where another debate needs to happen. What about poor people who occupy land, often illegally, often state land, sometimes private land, because they have nowhere else to go? Should they be criminalized? Or should we find an expedited way to normalize and recognize the rights of poor people who occupy land because they need a place to be? And so I think that there's a wider discussion here that's being lost in some of the hype around expropriation without compensation.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Ruth Hall from the University of the Western Cape, we appreciate your time, saying that there's been a failure to use tools already at government's disposal to redistribute land and sort of lead South Africa towards more equitable distributions of land. And of course, this is a hot issue. That motion went through Parliament today and discussed widely on social media. Let's take a quick look at a few more tweets for you right now. And we've got Lenny saying, so let me get this right, expropriated land will be owned by the state as opposed to the people. Is this not the land debate should be focused on? Surely empowering our people with title deeds provides more economic freedom than being mere leases. Another big debate within the debate of land itself. Matsawana, whoever said we want land for farming only better wake up. We want our land back so we can build banks, factories, malls, hospitals, schools, decent estates and have our own dams. For goodness sake, do not insult us with the farming story. Dr. Buthelezi, they must not think that the threat of hunger scares us. Because of them, we know exactly what hunger feels like. So even if they are right, at least we will starve on our land. Better than starving while landless. And Lovu, land expropriation fascinates me. Over 90% of completed land reforms opted for cash. That's an interesting thing, linking to the idea that young people want to farm, some don't. Also, I can never help but think that many will be disappointed when they receive the land, when some realize that it's not in Branston. So that's something else to think about, the huge move to urban areas. Are we now talking about resettling claims on rural land, and what about families that have urbanized like many South Africans have?